Glad to be here this morning. Thank you to Mark, Chris, Tucker. I know a lot of men in this room, a lot of my peers have a lot of respect for. I have a lot of respect for this time, so it's humbling to have the opportunity to come and share my story. For those of you who don't know me, 2 to 3 minutes background on me. Grew up here in Atlanta, went to Georgia, go Dogs. Do commercial real estate here in Atlanta. Do the acquisition work for a company called Atlanta Property Group. Actually, one of the recent buildings I worked on, we bought Leadership Ministries as a tenant in. So that's a great thing. I'm the oldest of 4. Got married about a year ago to a wonderful young lady from Dublin, Georgia. Got married in Dublin. It was awesome. It was hot, very hot. But very happy to be here. I've been coming to Friday morning men's group here for about 2 years. Proud member, as Mark mentioned, of the Millennial Table. It's from here. Our proud leader, Tucker. I'm the first person to speak from that table. And as he mentioned, probably the earliest most of these guys have ever woken up, including me. Just very happy to come and share, my story and my walk with Christ this morning with this group. And I think, I just wanted to focus on, my testimony. And when you think about testimony, a lot of times you think about life before Christ, meeting Christ, life after Christ. Whoa, there we go. Anyway, it's on now. But, for a lot of people that grew up in Atlanta or in the Southeast or a lot of places in the U.S., you have a lot of exposure to Christianity early on and, to different degrees, but a lot of exposure, within Christian homes. So a lot of, what your testimony ends up being is, I know Christ, I know who he is, but the testimony is a lot of, your decision to make that the most important part of your life, for that relationship to really define you and to kind of lean into that grace and how it really affects, who you are and how you live every day. And that's a lot of, what my story is. I grew up here in Atlanta, had 2 awesome parents. My dad, Ben, who a lot of the men in here may know and know kind of the character and faith that he has. And my parents, it's very clear, within our family that, the faith was the most important thing for them. And that kind of defined a lot of what our family was about with me and my siblings. I accepted Christ with my parents at age 7. And, at that point and going forward, I really believed that. And I believed, that Christ had died for me. And, my faith, it grew. And it was important to me in high school and all through that time. And, anyone who tells you differently, I would say, I think it's very wrong. I think growing up in a Christian home is a wonderful blessing in every way. And, I had my own journey to come to my faith, but I think a lot of the character and the faith, that I have today comes from growing up in that kind of environment and being exposed, to that on a daily basis. But at the same time, as a lot of people in here know, when you grow up around that, at least for me, there's some interesting, things that happen. One was, it was incredible for me looking back how much knowledge I had of God and how little experience I had of him. 2, so much, especially as you get into high school, for me, being defined as a Christian is, a lot of it is, ends up being kind of the decisions you make and what you do. And, I was a Christian, so, I wasn't going to drink. I wasn't going to make certain decisions with ladies. I was going to be the one going on the trips. And those were all good things. But, incidentally, maybe not on purpose, it kind of begins to define kind of, at least for me and for people around me, what it was kind of to be a Christian. And last, it's amazing, as I look back how much time I had, in church and Bible studies and other things, and how little time I actually ever spent on my own, in the Word and praying. Not even intentionally, it just, that wasn't really a priority for me. And ended up going off to UGA, and pretty quickly it was apparent, that, the faith and the character that I thought I had, wasn't exactly what I had thought. And I joined a fraternity at Georgia. I made maybe the unwise decision to live at my fraternity house. It's a discussion for another day, should do that or not. But, those guys were great, and ironically, some of those guys are now, some of my closest friends and guys who have really pushed me in my faith. But at that time, it's just not a healthy environment. And anyone who tells you that they can live in a certain environment that pushes certain things, for an extended period of time and it not really end up becoming who you are is wrong. And, for me, it just, kind of slowly but surely, it started to push me, towards a place that, it wasn't what I wanted to be defined by. I began, to drink in college. I made some decisions I really regretted. Some ladies, to my parents' deep chagrin, I spent a night in the Athens Clarke County Jail. But, what was interesting about that time is, I was still doing well within my life, and I was actually having fun, initially at college. Anyone tells you differently is wrong. Right away, that seemed fun. It was, and I was also, trying to do well in school, which I was, and, I still had my faith. And like I said earlier, it was important to me, and it was just push and pull about it. I was still trying to do that off here on the side. And I was like, I had different, compartments of my life. And I was trying to, serve an audience in each of them. And maybe from the outside, it looked like I was doing a good job balancing it. But I remember I was tired. And around early in my junior year, I started to really think about, what was my legacy going to be? Is this really, what I want to be remembered for at the end of college? Is this who I want to be? I was trying to just balance so much. I remember I really came across a verse then that kind of became a life verse for me in Matthew 11 that says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon me and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you'll find rest for your souls." That's what I needed. And I think that, like I said, this was early in my junior year. It was the first time for me that I had really thought, genuinely at the bottom of my heart, that maybe, my faith and that maybe following Christ actually was the best path for me. As much as people had told me that before, deep in my soul, I never really believed that. I think that God, works through guys who are humbled, who have faith and who surrender. And it was really the first time that I had been willing to surrender, kind of my life. And, I didn't have some awe-inspiring, like, light through the window moment, but I began, sometimes God works that way, sometimes God works slower, but, over the course of that entire year, I began to really re-enter, the Word. I began having a quiet time every day before my class on my own because I wanted to for the first time, and, God began to work, on my heart, from the inside out. And, I was still enjoying my time in college, and I had lots of friends in different aspects, but it became less about, doing, and worrying, and more about me spending time just working on my heart. And a couple of other interesting observations of kind of that second 2 years of college for me was, the other thing I did is I thought, if this is the person I'm going to be, and this is what's going to define me, I had some change in my heart, but, I had some issues with my faith, and, I'm a thinker, and there are some hard questions out there. And I thought, I need to be able to defend what I believe. I need to be able to understand what I believe. So I also spent, a lot of time, reading tons and tons of books and researching during that time and just leaning into some difficult questions because they're there about Christianity, and you're much better off, leaning into those and maybe leaning into some of those doubts. And it ended up, really broadening, my knowledge, of the faith and my ability to defend it, which for me, if this is how I was going to define who I lived, was important. And the two other things where I began to surround myself with some different people in college. Robert Thrasher is here this morning. I started to meet with him, some other guys on a weekly basis, got really involved with the church there called Classic City. And my mentor, the preacher there, a guy named Lee Mason, who a lot of people here may know, who got really close with, actually helped start and lead their kind of middle school ministry, within that time. And, really not because I was really excited about all this. And it's what I wanted to do, out of my heart. And the last thing, like I said, and there's nothing more important, is I just started to spend much more time in the Word and on my own, with Christ. At the end of my junior year, I was very passionate about, my gifts are people and serving people and being with people, and I also love business, and that's kind of, the gifts that the Lord blessed me with. And I was looking to do investment banking, and at the end of my junior year, it's probably the internship, and that's where you end up usually working. And I had thought that I wanted to go to New York, and I wanted to get out of Atlanta. I had grown up here. I thought that would be a really cool place to step into, as a Christian and live that out. Anyway, long story short, I ended up applying to probably 12 jobs up there. I got like 5 final interviews. 2 of the jobs up there, I basically had been told that I had received the job. And in a interesting set of circumstances, both those offers were pulled from me in about the same week. And at the same time, I received an offer to work at SunTrust Robinson Humphrey here. And I remember I was very disappointed, but at the same time, I almost had to smile because I'd prayed so much about that, and the Lord had made it so clear that, maybe not what I wanted, but Atlanta was the place that He wanted me to be, the community that He wanted to step into, to make an impact in and to grow in. And I ended up taking that job and going and working at Robinson Humphrey. And I remember before I started working, there's a verse in Proverbs that said, "As water reflects the face, so one's life reflects the heart." And I remember thinking, I want to continue to work on my heart on a daily basis so that my life will reflect that, and my actions would reflect, kind of the overflow of my heart. And I thought a lot about what does it look like to be a businessman here in Atlanta and to live out your faith. And I wasn't going to be, ministering to people at my job or anything, but I thought I want to be excellent at what I do. I want to have the right attitude. I want to be a servant, to those around me. And also, I want to give my time, although I didn't have much of it when I started working, to what I believe in, what I think is important, what my gifts are. That was serving and mentoring, being with, with kids and my peers. So I ended up deciding to join Young Life right out of school. I was probably the only younger investment banker there, Robinson Humphrey, who's also a Young Life leader. But I remember the first week there, actually, we had a huge deal going on. It was our first Young Life Club. All my bosses were there. It was like 7 o'clock, and I was like, I don't think I can leave. And I remember thinking, you know what? It was an interesting moment for me. I was like, this, being excellent at my job is important, but, here's a test right away, and, this is so important to me, and this is going to be kind of what I'm about, as a working person. So I ended up getting up, telling my boss I had somewhere to go, leaving. I got some weird looks. It was very hard to do. Don't worry, they didn't fire me. Same thing happened the next week. I ended up having been retired this summer, but I ended up leading Young Life for the next 5 years. And it was the growth for me and the opportunity to love and serve on kids was incredible. And the Lord, Atlanta has opened up so many people and opportunities for me. It has been incredible. I've been able to lead a couple of younger guys' Bible studies, a bunch of Christian men's business groups that I'm a part of. My group of guys here, I remember when I first moved here, I had fortunately enough that I had been humbled in college enough to know that, if you try to, walk against the world and walk in the world and, without a strong group of guys around you, the world will eat you up and spit you out. And, I felt that initially. I was working 90 hours a week when I first got here. And I remember I called up Robert, and I was like, man, I need to keep meeting with you. We need to keep meeting. And fortunately, he agreed. And remember, I called John Hamilton. He called Brad Brizendine. We started meeting, bi-weekly basis. Shortly after Schroeder, Mark, those guys joined us. And we've been meeting for the last 5 years. And that has been one of the biggest, most amazing things for me in Atlanta in terms of just the accountability and being vulnerable, and those guys encouraging me. And I think for them in just terms of, keeping my eyes, on my faith and just how important that is. And it necessarily hasn't been the easiest thing for me since I graduated. Like I said, I worked so much out of school. I ended up leaving that job. It was exhausting, and it wore me out, and I was trying to, it really kept me away from a lot of things I thought was important. My grandmother, who's very close with, who's struggling with Alzheimer's. As I said, I got married, and that is, my wife and I have an amazing relationship, but that's had its ups and downs and been a fairly humbling experience for me in a lot of ways. Still growing into that. But the most important thing for me is that, I wake up every day now and I do my best to live for an audience of one. And, it's so clear to me, how deeply of a sinner I am, and that, my story and me speaking today, and me being saved is just by God's grace and His alone. And just trying to lean into that on a daily basis. And it's a great, it's funny, the great paradox, of life, which is, as Jesus said, you have to give up your life to get it. At least for me, and I believe this all my heart, but a lot of, as men, what your longings and your hope and your desire, for purpose and meaning, is found and is only found, in that relationship. And so that's my encouragement today. That's my story. Like I said, thank you again for the opportunity to share this. Hopefully it identified with some of you. I'd love to close this out for us real quick. Dear Lord, thank you for this morning. Thank you for this time. Thank you for the opportunity to come and fellowship with other guys, to encourage each other, to hold each other accountable, to share. And dear Lord, you made us as relational beings, and you work in us through other people. So I pray that you continue to bless this time. All the men in this room, you would bless them, help all of us to live out our faith with each other and in our lives. We just thank you, dear Lord, for your Son and for that relationship. Amen. Amen. All right, thank you.